Hello everybody, Legion devs have released a lovely present for us this festive time, and the T2 ships have made their way onto the battlefield. Plenty of interesting choices to be had, and definitely going to shake up the meta on a lot of the water-based maps. So stay tuned and have a look and let me know which ship you are most interested in the comments. Just a word of note, all of these figures were accurate at time of recording, but the devs are actively working on these ships, so bear in mind some numbers may move around by the time you actually watch this. Okay, so first things first, let's just have a look at the factories, shall we? So Tech 2 factory is this exact same cost as the Tech 2 advanced shipyard for Cortex here, and is actually the more expensive than Armada's Tech 2 shipyard. Biggest differences we'll see here straight off the bat as well is that Legion has one additional ship that both Armada and Cortex do not have. What that ship is we'll get into it soon enough, but let's get started looking at each of the ships. So first things first, let's have a look at the cons. So here we have all three cons for each faction. Let's have a look at the differences between them. So we have T2 con here, 700 metal, 9,000, which is the same as the other two. Speed 65, which is lower than Armada's, the same as Cortex's. Same build power as Cortex. Line of sight is the same. Radar and e-storage is exactly the same as Cortex's ship constructor. Next is the cons, the naval engineers, sorry. So we have Armada's, Cortex's, and Legion's ones. Legions can build a multitude of stuff. Defenses, AAs, pretty much the same stuff that the rest of the factions can build. So we're not going to go too heavy into that. Still missing a Legion mine, but other than that, everything else is good to go. So cost-wise, 200 metal, 3,000 energy, exactly the same as the Pathfinder. Again, Armada's is slightly cheaper. Speed, again, same as the naval engineer, and build power is again the same. So when it comes to constructions and naval engineers, basically exactly the same as Cortex, so you don't have to worry about it too much there. Right, next up is onto the fast assault / raiders. So here we have the Maelstrom, the Brimstone, and now the Leo Campus anti-swarm ships. So this one has a actual forward mounted gun, so splash damage, main gun, whereas obviously these are flame or lightning based weapons, so slightly different style of weapon. Obviously this does damage in a cone, whereas this is just splash. So as we stop all these shooting for a second, all of them have a small AA on them, but let's look at differences here. So big first difference is this is actually the cheapest tech free ship comparing to the rest of 500 metal. Its energy use is also cheaper by quite a bit. We're talking almost 1,000 energy cheaper than the Brimstone. The Maelstrom is the most expensive at 11,000. DPS though, it is the lowest DPS out of all of them. It has the shortest range out of all of them. Speed though does put it at the fastest of the three ships, with LOS being the same. And it does have the same radar as each of them. So as we select this and just go, you can see its turn rate and everything is a lot quicker. And I actually had it go a slightly further path there. Yeah, so kind of numbers wise looks fairly balanced. We'll see how it actually plays in real game. Moving on next then to, you know, your next unit you're probably going to build, and that will be your cruisers. So we have obviously the Paladin here, Buccaneer, and now the Thalassa, I guess that's how you pronounce it. Torpedoes and Gatling guns Going to be a little bit different than what we're used to with the others having laser-based weaponry and this one having plasma. So we stop these shooting. This one actually has a blind spot behind for its torpedoes, which is interesting to see. Legion ships do have a lot more when it comes to blind spots that the others don't have. So yeah, if you're attacking a Legion cruiser, attacking it from behind if with subs would leave it pretty exposed. But let's look at the numbers. 900 metal is cheapest metal wise and cheaper as well when it comes to energy production, or required, that is. DPS is a bit of a mixture. We got 485 for this. Obviously the Buccaneers is a little bit different because it's got those close range lasers as well, which add to the DPS. And the cruiser for the Paladin here having the same. So the numbers are a bit skewed, but fairly even damage with the Paladin, I would say. Range on the Thalassa is a lot less. Also, with the Thalassa, or however you pronounce it, its chain gun is a lot more inaccurate. So shooting closer to it, you're going to get more damage. So I'm guessing that's kind of how they've balanced that one, only having a single gun compared to the other. Range is 447. So it's the shortest range out of the two, and speed again is actually the middle ground between the three. So it'll be interesting to see how this cruiser plays out comparing it to the other two. I would argue that with the chain gun, I don't particularly like the chain guns. So I feel it may end up feeling weaker than the other cruisers. So we'll have to see how that plays out. The next is we're going to utility. So radar jammers. Now this is a big difference between the three, is that the Dolus here has radar and jamming. Has quite a big radar here of 1,850. As we zoom out, it's a bit hard to see, but can't quite tell, but I think that's up to here. I think the radar's actually coming from these ships over here. But still, the only jamming ship to include radar, but its jammer is actually pretty small, 650, when you compare the jammers on the other ships of 980 and 900. So it basically pays for the jammer having less range. That's what pays for the radar. So it is an interesting choice. I like how it's basically like two ships that are kind of connected together rather than it being just like one ship, which is pretty cool. Cost though, 450. So it is twice the cost of, or not twice, but a lot more expensive than a Phantasm. Energy wise, it is also the most expensive. Speed, it is the slowest. So it definitely has its benefits of having that radar, but it's got its costs in elsewhere. So if people say that this is overpowered, it's definitely made up for it elsewhere. Next, though, we have the anti-nuke ships. Now, this is interesting because the Legion anti-nuke ship is the only ship that actually has defenses. It has drones. It is a drone carrier that also functions as an anti-nuke. So the drones are pretty strong at providing vision. So we'll see how it goes. They has the same support range and exactly the same cost as the Oasis here. So I'd maybe argue that it needs to maybe cost a little bit more if it's got drones on it, because this thing's defenseless at that cost. This thing isn't defenseless at this cost. So yeah, I mean, it does have to pay for the drones, but still, I don't know. And is the same cost as the Haven. So yeah, maybe this one needs a little bit of a cost increase or something to offset the fact that it has defenses, compared to the other two, which of course do not have that at all. These ships actually generate energy, of course, 300 energy each. This is offset by 83 energy needing to be used to build the anti-nuke. So you only get like 200 and some energy for it. Moving on to the last utility, which is the Flaks. You see these two have Flaks plus actual other secondary AA guns, whereas this has two AAs, two AA chain guns, and that is it. So DPS of 840, which is huge when you compare it to the other two. Range of 800, which is the same as the others. Reload is very short as well, because obviously they're chain guns. Speed is, again, slower than the other two. Line of sight and air line of sight should be the same, pretty much. But cost is, again, the same. So this technically has double the damage of these two. But because it's a Gatling, it doesn't have AoE, whereas these two obviously have AoE damage with the Flaks. So it'll be interesting to see how these line up, being the same cost but more damage. They may be better against larger aircraft like dragons or maybe atomic bombers compared to the Flak, but then they're not going to be as good, obviously, versus mass swarms of units. So interesting to see how that plays out. Next, on to the subs. We have long-range subs. Kraken. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name of the Legion sub. And then the Serpent. DPS is pretty much the same between all three. Range is the same as the Krakens. I'm guessing a lot of the stats are going to be exactly the same. Yeah, all the stats are exactly identical between the Kraken and these two ships. So they're both the same. So there's nothing really to worry about here between the two. I would say maybe the model on this one is slightly bigger and therefore it may be slightly easier to hit. But other than that, identical. Moving on to the fast assault subs. We have all three of them here. Models fairly similar. Again, the Legion model does seem like it's slightly bigger than the other two, which means its hitbox is going to be slightly bigger. Cost-wise, it is the most expensive at 1,100 metal. That's a lot of metal for a sub. You can almost fit 2 Predators in the cost of this. That's how much there is for metal-wise. Energy cost, though, is cheaper than a Barracuda, but more expensive still than the Predator. Let's look at DPS numbers. It is the highest on DPS, highest on range, actually. An extra 200 range is quite large. So as you can see here, it shoots all the way to out here. Whereas this one can only shoot, even though it's moved slightly forward. So double the range, almost. Not, wow. Extra 200 range. That's 200 range between the two. So quite a big difference in range there. When you consider the long range subs have 850, I don't see there really ever being a need for you to build the long range sub. It has less DP. Well, I know it has more DPS apparently. Okay, well that's why. But still, the cost difference between the two is you're only talking an extra like 800 metal. You are talking a lot more energy, but still, that's an interesting one. We'll see if that gets balanced. Bear in mind that all of these numbers are up to change. It's not balanced properly yet against main game. I'm just showing you this as a way of you seeing how it's going to compare to the rest of the game. Now, moving on to what you actually want to see, and that is the battleships. Now, as you saw in the intro, Legion has a bit of a thing up its sleeve here, as the battleship itself is not as good straight at the bat as the other battleships. These battleships do a lot more damage by the looks of it. Although as I'm saying that, I'm completely wrong. These battleships here have a lot of splash damage. We're seeing, 657 max damage for the Despot, 600 for the Dreadnought, but for the Silica, that's how I'm going to pronounce it, 800, range of 750. So it is the shortest range battleship out of all three of them. Speed as well. It is the slowest ship out of all three of them. So that is its massive like nerf to it, considering it could do more damage. It will not keep up with the other battleships. And then finally, its line of sight is the same, but costs. Costs, you ask. What are the costs? Well, 2,900 metal for this battleship. It is physically smaller than the other two as well. And the metal cost for the other two being at 3,400 and 3,300. So it is quite a big difference in metal cost between them. So that's interesting to see that a ship with higher damage is cheaper than the other two that have less damage. Max health of a Silica being 8,000, which is actually a lot less, a huge amount less. 8,300 is its max health. Well, actually, that's scaled because it's actually gotten some kills, as opposed to 11,000 of the Despot. So these are, well, I would say fragile, but not really in the grand scheme of things. But still, not the tankiest of boats. And before we get on to the big ships, and that's what you want to see, got the long range ships. So we have the missile ships here. We have the Messenger, the Lombo, and then the new ship, the Ultor. DPS values are fairly even between them, 350s between them and 301. Ranges are identical. Costs are identical, so nothing really to worry about here. The Lombo is technically faster. The biggest difference, I would say, is the clustering of the missiles. So as we fire the missiles from the Ultor, fire the missiles from the Messenger, and from the Lombo, firstly, you see the difference in the way it shoots. These missiles go up, split out, and then spread out. Whereas the Ultor is kind of more similar to the catapult, where it just fires a bunch of missiles that rain down. But it also means that there's a lot bigger of a spread. And that's the key thing between them there, is the spread. These other missile cruisers are fairly close range shots. The Ultor has a huge spread when it comes to missiles. I think if you shoot it closer, maybe the spread will be less, but don't think you're going to use this for accurately targeting stuff. It's definitely going to be more of a do damage over a wide area. Again, similar to Cortex's catapult. Even close range, you can see it's still spread out quite a bit. But yeah, and then moving on to the one ship that Legion has that the other doesn't, and that is the Cornif, or however you pronounce it. Long range cluster plasma bombardment vessel. Range of 2,100, which, just for reference, the flagship has a range of 2,500, 2,400. Legion's one only has 700. So basically, we haven't got to that yet, but this will be for bombarding land rather than having to build flagships to do that. Flagships for Legion will be used for fighting other ships. So this has interesting weapons. So it has a lot of cluster. And with it off the shore here, for all of you Supreme enjoyers, you can see that it is still not able to reach Eco, but it can reach this Geo here. And it actually has 2 ring markers, if you notice. So if we fire there, one fire there for me, it's only the main gun that shoots with its cluster. And then the inner ring is for the smaller guns on the front, which are basically the equivalent of the artillery that, you know, Legion has in general, just the static artillery. So it's going to be interesting to see players play this, because it means that you're going to have a dedicated artillery ship rather than flagships if you get to that stage in the game. It still has the same range, technically less than a flagship anyway, so it will lose on a straight up flagship first flagship fight. but it does technically have more bombardment, should we say, being with all this cluster damage. And then finally, we go to flagships. And as we've just already said, the biggest difference here is that flagships in the current game are made as bombardment platforms, and then, you know, as battleships as well. Whereas Legion has been designed as this is a combat flagship. It's made for dealing with other ships, and as such, its range is significantly shorter. 700 range. Bear in mind, the long-range submarines had 850, meaning that a long-range submarine can outrange the flagship. Not that it could shoot it anyway, but still. And as we select the weapon systems of the Neptune and fire, you can see that it has twin railguns, which, bear in mind, railguns have a bit of impulse damage. And it also has this heat beam. So as we quickly look at the health values, we see 4,800 for the Neptune, 48,000 for the Neptune, 53 for the Hydra, and 50 for the Epoch. So it is the lowest health of the three. Its cost is the lowest to make up for it in metal. Energy is more intensive though. It is the only battleship to generate its own energy supply though, with it being able to generate 500 energy on its own. It only requires 600 energy to shoot, which means you're only down 100 energy when it's shooting, which is quite important really. All of them have their own radars, which the Legion's one is the shortest as well. But I'm interested to see how much damage this does. So it has a DPS of 3,000 damage, and the Black Hydra here has 1,300. So it is a lot shorter. Now, obviously, one of the biggest things to come out of this is the fact that Legion is going to have ships that can walk on land. How this shakes up the meta is going to be huge, because Legion ships being able to cross the gap here will mean that if you've won top C and your opponent's won bottom C and you're Legion, you can actually impact top C significantly. You don't have to cross this gap here. They are very slow, but you could walk these all the way around like that, or walk them to here and just massively impact. Not only that, no longer do you have to transition to Tech 3 to make an impact if you win C. You could just walk these guys right up here to Eco, and they are very, very powerful. As we just turn one of these guys around to shoot, you saw how effective they were versus Tech 1. Now, they have no AA themselves, so they will be weak to air, but there's not much of a transition time between land and sea, and they can continue to shoot as they move. So yeah, dangerous unit. So this is something to be aware of in your next Supreme game. If someone wants to play Legion, it's probably due to this unit right here. So thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at the new Legion C, and I'll see you all next time.